Chapter 47. The Count of Monte Cristo uttered an exclamation of joy on receiving a visit from Albert de Morcerf and his friend Beauchamp one morning. "I see we've interrupted you while you were putting your papers in order," said Count. "No, these are Monsieur Cavalcanti's papers," replied the Count. "Monsieur Cavalcanti?" asked Beauchamp. "Certainly," said Albert. "Don't you know that's the young man the Count is introducing into Paris society?" "Just a moment," said Monte Cristo. "I'm not introducing anyone into society, least of all Monsieur Cavalcanti." "And who's to marry Mademoiselle Danglars instead of me?" continued Count. "You can imagine how terrible that makes me feel." "What?" asked Beauchamp. "Cavalcanti is going to marry Mademoiselle Danglars." "How can you, a journalist, not know that?" said Monte Cristo. "Everyone's talking about it." "And was it you who arranged the marriage?" asked Beauchamp. "I arrange a marriage? My God, I see you don't know me. On the contrary, I was opposed to it. I even refused to make the request." "I see. Because of our friend Albert," said Beauchamp. "Because of me!" exclaimed Albert. "Not at all. The Count will tell you that I begged him to help me break off the engagement, which is now broken off, although he claims he's not the one I have to thank for that good fortune." "Nevertheless, you don't seem too happy, Albert," said the Count. "Could it be that, without being aware of it yourself, you're actually in love with Mademoiselle Danglars?" "Not that I know of," said Albert, smiling. "But you're not yourself today," continued the Count. "What's the matter?" "I have a headache." "Well, then, in that case, I have an infallible remedy to suggest to you, a remedy that has been successful with me each time I've met with some annoyance." "What is it?" "Travel. And it so happens that I've recently met with quite a number of annoyances, so I'm about to travel. Would you like to come with me?" "Gladly. But where shall we go?" "We'll go where the air is pure, where all sounds are soothing, where no matter how proud one may be, one feels humble and finds oneself small. In short, we'll go to the sea. I love the sea as much as one loves a mistress, and I long for her when I haven't seen her for some time." "All right, Count, let's go," said Albert. "To the sea?" "Yes." "You accept my invitation?" "Yes." "Very well, then. This evening in my courtyard there will be a traveling carriage in which you can stretch out as comfortably as in your own bed. Monsieur Beauchamp, the carriage easily holds 4 people. Would you like to come with us?" "Thank you, but I've just come back from the sea. I made a little trip to the Borromée Islands." "That doesn't matter. Come with us anyway," said Albert. "Now, I'm sure you know that if I refuse, it's because it's impossible for me to leave Paris just now." "Not that it matters a great deal to me, but where are we going?" asked Albert. "To Normandy, if that suits you." "It suits me very well. Will we really be in the country? No society, no neighbors. Our only company will be horses for riding, dogs for hunting, and a boat for fishing." "That's exactly what I need. I'll notify my mother, and then I'll be ready to leave whenever you like." "All right. We'll leave at 5 o'clock. Can you be here then?" "Oh, yes. I have nothing to do between now and then except get ready for the trip." Albert took leave of the Count, who, after nodding smilingly to him, stood still for a few moments as though absorbed in some profound meditation. Then, passing his hand over his forehead as though to brush away his reverie, he went over to his gong and struck it twice. Bertuccio entered. "Monsieur Bertuccio," said the Count, "I'm leaving for Normandy this evening, instead of tomorrow or the next day as I thought at first. Send a messenger to notify the first relay station. Monsieur de Morcerf will accompany me. Go." Bertuccio obeyed. A courier hurried to Pontoise to announce that the Count's carriage would pass that evening. From Pontoise, a messenger was sent to the next relay station, and so on until 6 hours later all the stations along the route had been notified. Before leaving, the Count went in to see Haydee, told her he was leaving and where he was going, and placed the entire household under her orders. Albert arrived on time. The journey, dull at the beginning, soon became interesting because of its swiftness. Albert had never seen anything like it. "Here's a pleasure I never knew before, the pleasure of speed," he said. "But where the devil do you find such horses? Do you have them made to order?" "Precisely," replied the Count. 6 years ago in Hungary, I found a famous stallion renowned for his speed. I bought him, I don't know how much. It was Bertuccio who took care of it. That same year, the stallion sired 32 colts. The 32 horses we're going to use tonight are all the progeny of that single stallion. They're all alike, entirely black except for a star on the forehead, for the stallion's mares were chosen as carefully as a sultan chooses his harem favorites." "That's magnificent. But tell me, Count, what do you do with all these horses?" "Why, I travel with them, as you can see." "Yes, but you're not always traveling." "Some day when I no longer need them, Bertuccio will sell them. He claims he'll be able to make 30 or 40,000 francs on them." "Count, will you allow me to express the thought that just occurred to me?" "Certainly." It's just that after you, Monsieur Bertuccio must be the richest man in Europe. You're quite mistaken, Viscount, replied Monte Cristo. I'm sure that if you turned Bertuccio's pockets inside out, you wouldn't find more than 10 sous in them. Why is that? Asked Albert. Your Monsieur Bertuccio must be the eighth wonder of the world. I warn you, Count, if you tell me many more miraculous things, I'll begin not to believe you. There's nothing miraculous about anything I do, Albert. It's all a question of figures and logic. Now consider this question. Why does a steward steal? Why, because it's his nature. He steals for the sake of stealing. No, that's not true. He steals because he has a wife and children, because he has ambitious desires for himself and his family, and above all, he steals because he's not sure he'll always remain with his master and wants to make his future secure. But Monsieur Bertuccio is alone in the world. He spends my money without accounting for anything to me, and he's sure he'll never leave me. Why is he sure of that? Because I couldn't find a better steward. You're dealing only with probabilities. Not at all. I deal only with certainties. For me, a good servant is one over whom I have the right of life and death. And you have that right over Bertuccio. Yes, replied the Count. There are some words which close the conversation like an iron door. The Count's yes was one of those words. The rest of the journey was carried out with the same speed. The 32 horses, divided into 8 relays, covered the 48 leagues in 8 hours. They arrived in the middle of the night at the gate of the beautiful estate, which the porter opened for them. He had been notified by a messenger from the last relay station. Albert was shown to his suite, where he found a bath and a supper ready waiting for him. After taking his bath and eating his supper, he went to bed. All night long he was lulled by the melancholy sound of waves breaking on the shore. When he awoke the next morning, he went to the window, opened it, and found himself on a terrace overlooking the sea. In the cove lay a small corvette, tall-masted and narrow of beam. Around it were a number of little fishing boats belonging to the fishermen of the neighboring villages. They seemed to be humble subjects awaiting the orders of their queen. The day was spent in various sports, in all of which the Count excelled. They shot a dozen pheasants, caught an equal number of trout in the stream, had dinner overlooking the sea, and took tea in the library. Toward the evening of the third day, Albert, exhausted by the strenuous exercise which seemed to be child's play for the Count, was sleeping near the window when the sound of a horse's hoofs on the gravel of the road made him raise his head. He looked out of the window and saw his own valet, whom he had not brought with him on the journey. "Why is Florentine here?" he cried, leaping to his feet. Can my mother be ill? He ran out to meet the valet, who, still out of breath, handed him a small sealed packet containing a newspaper and a letter. "Who's this letter from?" asked Albert anxiously. "From Monsieur Beauchamp," replied Florentine. "Was it Monsieur Beauchamp who sent you here?" "Yes, sir. He gave me the money for the trip, rented a horse for me, and made me promise not to stop until I reached you. I made the trip in 15 hours. Albert opened the letter. After reading the first few lines, he uttered a cry and seized the newspaper with trembling hands. Suddenly his eyes went dim, his legs seemed to melt from under him, and he leaned against Florentine, who put out his arm to support him. "Poor young man," murmured the Count, who was watching him. "It's true that the sins of the father shall be visited upon the children to the 3rd and 4th generation." Meanwhile, Albert regained his strength and continued to read. Then he crumpled both the newspaper and the letter and said, "Florentine, is your horse in condition to go back to Paris?" "It's only a poor old nag." "Oh my God, how were things at home when you left?" "Rather calm, but when I came back from Monsieur Beauchamp's house, I found Madame de Morcerf in tears. She sent for me to find out when you would return. I told her Monsieur Beauchamp had asked me to go and bring you back. At first she put out her hand to stop me, but then she thought a while and said, 'Yes, go, Florentine, tell him to hurry back.'" Albert turned around and went back to the room from which Monte Cristo had been watching him. "Count," he said, "I thank you for your hospitality, and I would have liked to enjoy it longer, but I must return to Paris." "What's happened?" "A terrible disaster. Please allow me to leave immediately. Something more precious than my life is at stake. I beg you, Count, don't ask me any questions. Just give me a horse." "My stables are at your service," said Monte Cristo, "but you'll kill yourself with fatigue if you ride all the way back. Take a post-chaise or a carriage." "No, that would take too long. And besides, I need that fatigue you are worried about. It will do me good." Albert reeled like a man who has been struck by a bullet and sank into a chair near the door. The Count did not notice this, however, for he had gone to the window and called out, "Ali, a horse for Monsieur de Morcerf, and hurry. He wants to leave at once." These words brought Albert back to life. He dashed out of the room, and the Count followed him. "Thank you," said the young man as he leaped to the saddle. "Is there a password I need to give at the relay stations?" "No, just turn over the horse you're riding to them, and they'll saddle another one for you." "My departure must seem strange and foolish to you," he said. "You don't understand how a few lines in a newspaper can reduce a man to desperation. Read this, then," he added, throwing the paper to Monte Cristo, "but only after I'm gone, so that you will not see my shame." While the Count was picking up the newspaper, Albert sank his spurs into the belly of his horse, which, astonished that the rider should feel the need to use such a stimulus, started with the speed of an arrow. The Count looked after the young man with an expression of infinite compassion. He waited until he had completely disappeared in the distance before he looked down at the paper and read the following. "It has come to our attention that the castles defending the city of Yanina were surrendered by a French officer who also betrayed his benefactor, Ali Pasha, to the Turks. His name at that time was Fernand Mondego, but he has since acquired a title. He now calls himself the Count de Morcerf and is a member of the Chamber." Chapter 48. Albert burst into Beauchamp's house at 8 o'clock the next morning. Beauchamp's valet had been notified to expect him, and he led him into his master's bedroom immediately. "I've been waiting for you, my poor friend," said Beauchamp. "And here I am," said Albert. "The message you sent me proved your loyalty and affection, so let's not waste any time on preliminaries. Tell me everything that's happened, in detail." Albert, overwhelmed by shame and grief, listened as Beauchamp related the following facts. The article had appeared 2 days earlier in the newspaper other than Beauchamp's. Beauchamp was eating breakfast when he read it. Without finishing his meal, he hurried to the office of the newspaper. Although its political stand was diametrically opposed to his own, he was a close friend of its editor. "I've come to see you about the Morcerf article," said Beauchamp when he arrived. "Oh, yes, curious, isn't it?" said the editor. "So curious that it seems to me you're running the risk of being sued for libel." "Not at all. The man who gave us the information backed it up with such strong proof that we're perfectly sure Monsieur de Morcerf won't say a word. And it's a service to the country to unmask traitors who are unworthy of the honors bestowed on them." "Who gave you the information?" "Yesterday. A man who had just arrived from Yanina came in to see us with a formidable stack of documents. We hesitated to print the accusation, but he told us he'd give it to another newspaper if we didn't. You're a journalist, Beauchamp. You know what it means to have an important news item. We couldn't afford to let that one go. Now that the shot has been fired, it will be echoed all over Europe." Beauchamp realized that there was nothing he could do. He left in despair to send a message to Albert. But what he was unable to write to Albert, for it happened after the departure of his messenger, was that on the same day there was great agitation in the chamber. Nearly every member arrived ahead of time to discuss the sinister development which would surely focus public attention on one of their best-known colleagues. Some were reading the article, while others exchanged reminiscences which lent more light to the accusation. The Count of Morcerf was not liked by his colleagues. Like all parvenus, he felt forced to be excessively haughty in order to maintain his rank. The Count of Morcerf himself was the only one who had not read the article. He did not receive the newspaper in which it appeared, and had spent the morning writing letters and trying out a new horse. He therefore arrived at his customary hour with his customary haughty bearing, and entered the chamber without noticing the hesitation of the ushers or the lukewarm greetings of his colleagues. The session had been in progress for half an hour when he entered. Although Monsieur de Morcerf, unaware of what had happened, had not changed his bearing and expression in any way, they now struck everyone as more arrogant than usual, and his presence on that occasion seemed so aggressive to the assembly that everyone regarded it as ill-advised. Some regarded it as insolence, and others considered it an insult. It was obvious that the entire chamber was eager to open the debate. The accusing newspaper was seen in everyone's hands, but as always, each man hesitated to take the responsibility of beginning the attack. Finally, one of the honorable peers, a sworn enemy of Morcerf, mounted the rostrum with a solemnity which announced that the awaited moment had arrived. A hushed silence ensued. Morcerf alone was arrogant of the reason for the profound attention being given to the orator, who was not usually listened to so obligingly. But at the first words about Yanina and Colonel Fernand Mondego, Morcerf paled so horribly that a shudder ran through the whole assembly, and all eyes were fixed on him. The speaker concluded by requesting that an investigation be made as quickly as possible in order to crush the slander before it had time to spread, and to restore Monsieur de Morcerf to his high position in the esteem of the public. Morcerf was so overwhelmed, so trembling before that immense and unexpected calamity, that he was hardly able to stammer a few words to his colleagues while staring at them with bewildered eyes. This timidity which could have just as easily been due to the astonishment of an innocent man as to the shame of a guilty one, aroused a certain sympathy for him on the part of some of the members. Truly generous men are always ready to become sympathetic when their enemy's misfortune surpasses the limits of their hatred. The chairman called for a vote on the investigation. It was decided to hold one as soon as possible. Morcerf was asked how long he would need to prepare his defense. His courage had come back to him when he felt himself still alive after that first horrible blow. "Gentlemen," he said, "it is not with time that one must repulse an attack like the one which my unknown enemies have just launched against me. I will reply on the spot and immediately to the bolt of lightning which dazzled me for a moment just now. I can only wish that instead of having to justify myself in such a way, I should shed my blood in order to prove to my colleagues that I am worthy to consider myself their equal." These words made a favorable impression. "I request, therefore," continued Morcerf, "that the investigation be held as soon as possible, and I will supply the chamber with all the documents necessary to carry it out." "Is the chamber of the opinion that the investigation should take place today?" asked the chairman. "Yes," was the unanimous reply. A commission of 12 members was appointed to examine the evidence produced by Morcerf. The first meeting of this commission was set for 8 o'clock that evening in the offices of the chamber. If several meetings proved to be necessary, they would be held in the same place and at the same hour. When this decision had been made, Morcerf asked permission to withdraw. He had to collect the documents he had been amassing for a long time in order to enable him to ward off this storm, which his wily and indomitable character had foreseen. He returned that evening at 8 o'clock, carrying a bundle of documents in his hand. His face seemed calm, and contrary to his habits, his bearing was unaffected, and he was dressing with severe simplicity. His presence produced a good effect. The commission was far from being hostile to him, and several of its members came up to him and shook hands with him. Just then, an usher entered and brought the chairman a letter. "You may have the floor, Monsieur de Morcerf," said the chairman, as he unsealed the letter. Morcerf began his defense, which was extremely eloquent and skillful. He produced evidence proving that Ali Pasha had, up until the last day of his life, honored him with his entire confidence, since he entrusted him with a life-and-death mission to the emperor himself. He showed the ring, a sign of authority with which Ali Pasha sealed his letters, and which he had given to Morcerf so that on his return he could come straight to him, even if he were in his harem, no matter what time of day or night he arrived. Unfortunately, said Morcerf, his mission had not been successful, and when he came back to defend his benefactor, he found him already dead. "But," said Morcerf, "Ali Pasha's confidence in him was so great that on his deathbed he entrusted him with the care of his favorite mistress and the daughter he had had by her." Meanwhile, the chairman had begun to read the letter that had been brought to him. The first few lines gripped his attention. He read the letter through, then reread it. Fixing his eyes on Monsieur de Morcerf, he said, "Count, I believe you just told us that Ali Pasha entrusted you with the care of his wife and daughter, didn't you?" "Yes," replied Morcerf, "but misfortune pursued me in that as in everything else. On my return, I found that Vasiliki and her daughter Haydee had disappeared." "Did you know them personally?" "My intimacy with the Pasha and the supreme confidence he had in me permitted me to see them more than 20 times." "Have you any idea what became of them?" "Yes. I was told they succumbed to their grief and perhaps to their poverty. I wasn't rich at the time, and my life was in constant danger, so to my great regret, I was unable to go in search of them." The chairman frowned almost imperceptibly. "Gentlemen," he said, "you have heard Monsieur de Morcerf's explanations. Monsieur de Morcerf, can you produce a witness to substantiate what you have just told us?" "Alas," replied Morcerf, "all those who knew me at the Pasha's court have either died or disappeared. I believe myself to be the only one of my compatriots to have survived that frightful war. I have only the letters from Ali Pasha, which I have shown you, along with this ring, a token of his confidence in me. But the most convincing proof I have to offer against this anonymous attack is the complete absence of any testimony against my honor and the unstained record of my military career." A murmur of approbation arose from the assembly. The members were ready to vote when the chairman rose and said, "Gentlemen, I presume you will not be averse to listen to a witness who claims to have very important evidence and who has come forward of his own accord. After that, Monsieur de Morcerf has just told us, we may assume that this witness has come to prove our colleague's complete innocence. Here is the letter I have just received on the subject. Do you wish me to read it to you, or do you wish to proceed without taking note of the incident?" Morcerf turned pale and convulsively crumpled the papers he was holding in his hands. The commission voted to have the letter read, while Morcerf himself remained thoughtfully silent and expressed no opinion. The chairman therefore read the following. I can give extremely important information to the commission appointed to investigate the conduct of Lieutenant General de Morcerf in Epirus and Macedonia. I witnessed Ali Pasha's death, and I know what became of Vasiliki and Haydee. I place myself at the disposal of the commission and even demand the honor of being heard. I will be in the vestibule of the chamber when this letter is delivered. And who is this witness, or rather this enemy? Asked Morcerf unsteadily. We're about to learn that, said the chairman. Usher, is there someone waiting in the vestibule? Yes, sir. Who is it? A woman accompanied by a servant. The members of the commission looked at each other in surprise. Show the woman in, said the chairman. The usher withdrew and returned a few minutes later. Behind him walked a woman wearing a large veil that covered her completely, although the form outlined beneath the veil showed that she was a young and elegant woman. The chairman asked her to remove her veil, and the members then saw that she was dressed in the Greek manner and that she was exquisitely beautiful. Morcerf looked at her with a mixture of surprise and fright. For him, it was life or death that was about to come from those lovely lips. For the others, it was such a strange adventure that the question of Morcerf's salvation or downfall had become a secondary consideration. Madam, said the chairman, you have written us saying that you would give us some information on the Yanina affair and that you were an eyewitness to the events. Yes, I was there, replied the young woman, in a voice full of captivating sadness and impregnated by that sonority peculiar to Oriental voices. Allow me to remark that you were quite young at that time, said the chairman. I was 4 years old, but since the events were supremely important to me, I have not forgotten a single detail. How did the events concern you? Who are you that the catastrophe should have made such a deep impression on you? My father's life was at stake. I am Haydee, daughter of Ali Tebelin, Pasha of Yanina, and of Vasiliki, his beloved wife. The modest yet proud blush which suffused the young woman's cheeks, the fire in her eyes, and the majestic way in which she revealed her identity produced an indescribable effect on the assembly. As for the Count of Morcerf, he could not have been more overwhelmed if a thunderbolt had opened a chasm at his feet. Madam, said the chairman, after bowing respectfully, allow me to ask a simple question, which is not prompted by doubt, and which will be the last of its kind. Can you prove the truth of what you say? I can, replied Haydee, drawing a perfumed satin bag from under her veil. Here is my birth certificate, drawn up by my father and signed by his principal officials. Here is my certificate of baptism, for my father consented to have me raised in the religion of my mother. This certificate bears the seal of the Grand Primate of Macedonia and Epirus. And most important of all, perhaps, here is a deed attesting the sale of my mother and me to an Armenian slave merchant by the French officer who, in his infamous bargain with the Turks, reserved as his share of the booty his benefactor's wife and daughter, whom he sold for the sum of 400,000 francs. A greenish pallor invaded Morcerf's cheeks, and his eyes became bloodshot as he listened to these terrible accusations, which were received by the assembly in grim silence. Haydee, still calm, although much more threatening in her calmness than another woman would have been in anger, handed the deed of sale to the chairman. It was written in Arabic, but since the commission had foreseen that some of the documents produced as evidence might be written in Arabic, modern Greek, or Turkish, the interpreter of the chamber had been summoned. One of the noble peers, to whom the Arabic language which he had learned during the Egyptian campaign was familiar, followed the lines as the translator read aloud. I, El-Kabir, slave merchant and purveyor to the harem of His Highness, hereby acknowledge having received from the Count of Monte Cristo an emerald valued at 800,000 francs, which is to be transmitted to the Sublime Emperor in payment for a Christian slave girl named Haydee, 11 years of age, and recognized daughter of the late Ali Pasha of Yanina and his favorite Vasiliki. The said Haydee was sold to me, along with her mother, who died on reaching Constantinople 7 years ago by Colonel Fernand Mondego, a French officer formerly in the service of the late Ali Pasha. I made this purchase on behalf of His Highness, whose authorization I had, for the sum of 400,000 francs. Done with the authorization of His Highness at Constantinople in the year 1247 of the Hegira, signed El-Kabir. Beside the merchant's signature was the seal of the Sublime Emperor. A terrible silence followed the reading of this document. Morcerf, as though in spite of himself, stared at Haydee with frenzied eyes. Madam, said the chairman, would it be possible to question the Count of Monte Cristo, who, I believe, is now in Paris with you? The Count of Monte Cristo left for Normandy 3 days ago, replied Haydee. In that case, said the chairman, who advised you to take this action for which the commission thanks you, and which is furthermore quite natural in view of your birth and your great misfortune? My action was prompted by my respect and my grief. I am a Christian, but may God forgive me, I have always dreamed of avenging the death of my illustrious father. When I came to France, I learned that the traitor lived in Paris. I remained constantly watchful. I live a secluded life in the house of my noble protector. I live in that way because I like the shadows and the silence which allow me to live in my thoughts and memories. However, the Count of Monte Cristo surrounds me with paternal care, and nothing about worldly life is foreign to me. I read all the newspapers and magazines, and I receive all the newest music. It was in thus following the lives of others, without taking part in them, that I learned what happened in the chamber this morning and what was about to happen there this evening. I therefore wrote to you. And the Count of Monte Cristo had nothing to do with your action? Asked the chairman. He knows nothing about it. In fact, my only fear is that he may disapprove of it when he learns of it. Nevertheless, it's a glorious day for me, continued Haydee, her eyes flashing fire, for I have at last found the opportunity to avenge my father's death. Monsieur de Morcerf, said the chairman, do you recognize this lady as the daughter of Ali Tebelin, Pasha of Yanina? No, said Morcerf, making an attempt to stand up. It's a plot on the part of my enemies. Haydee, who had been looking toward the door as though she were expecting someone, abruptly turned to Morcerf and shrieked, So you do not recognize me? Well, I recognize you. You are Fernand Mondego, the French officer who instructed the troops of my noble father. It was you who surrendered the castles of Yanina. It was you sent to Constantinople by my father to negotiate for his life or death, brought back a forged decree of complete pardon. It was you who, with that decree, obtained the Pasha's ring as token of his authority. It was you who sold my mother and me into slavery. Murderer! Murderer! You still bear the blood of my father on your forehead. Look at him, all of you. These words were uttered with such a passionate ring of truth that all eyes turned to Morcerf as he put his hand to his forehead as though he could actually feel Ali Pasha's blood there. Do you positively recognize Monsieur de Morcerf as the French officer named Fernand Mondego? Asked the chairman. Do I recognize him? Cried Haydee. Oh, mother, you said to me, you were free. You had a father who loved you, and you were destined to be almost a queen. Look closely at that man, for it was he who made you a slave. It was he who raised your father's head on the end of a spear, and it was he who sold us. It was he who betrayed us. Look at that wide scar on his right hand. If you should forget his face, you will still recognize that hand which received the gold coins from El Kabir, the slave merchant. Yes, I recognize him. Now let me say whether he recognizes me or not. Morcerf hid his hand, which had indeed been scarred by a wound, and sank into his chair, crushed by black despair. The entire assembly was in turmoil. Monsieur de Morcerf, said the chairman, the justice of the court is equal for all, like that of God. It will not let you be overwhelmed by your enemies without giving you means of defending yourself. Do you wish new inquiries to be made? Do you wish me to send 2 members of the chamber to Yanina? Answer. Morcerf remained silent. The members of the commission looked at one another with a sort of terror. They knew Morcerf's energetic and violent character, and they realized that it would take a terrible blow to break down his defenses. Well, what have you decided? Asked the chairman. Nothing, replied Morcerf dully. Has Ali Pasha's daughter really spoken the truth, then? Are you really guilty of the things of which you are accused? Morcerf looked around him with an expression that would have touched the heart of a tiger, but it would not disarm his judges. Then he raised his eyes to the ceiling and lowered them again immediately, as though he were afraid the ceiling might open up to reveal the supreme judge himself. He tore open his coat as though it were choking him, and walked out of the room like a somber madman. His footsteps echoed mournfully under the high vaulted ceiling for a moment, then the sound was soon followed by the rumbling of his carriage as it bore him away with the horses at a gallop. Gentlemen, said the chairman when silence had been restored, do you find the Count of Monte... Dang it! Gentlemen, said the chairman when silence had been restored, do you find the Count of Morcerf guilty of felony, treason, and dishonor? Yes, replied the members of the investigating commission with a single voice. Haydee heard this sentence pronounced without showing either joy or pity. Then, drawing her veil back over her face, she bowed to the assembly majestically and walked out with the queenly tread which Virgil attributed to his goddesses.